Hello, everyone. I think we're going to get started in just a second. If everyone would like to take a seat, get yourself situated. Thanks so much. Sure, great.
Okay, I can get them out over there, or you can take them back. I have them here just made.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center. My name is Quentin Ring, and I am the Executive Director of Beyond Baroque. Thank you. We're here this afternoon to pay tribute to Beyond Baroque's longest-serving Executive Director, Fred Dewey. I regret that this is the circumstance that has gathered all of you here for the first time in many months, and years even, in some cases, many cases. But I'm also very glad to have this community gathered again. Poets, writers, artists, friends of Beyond Baroque, and above all, friends and family of Fred. It's good to see all of you. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention a few practical items. First, please do remember to stay masked throughout the tribute unless you're eating or drinking or speaking at this podium. We'll be cleaning off the microphone between each speaker. We do have a good many folks here to pay tribute to Fred, so if each speaker could be relatively brief, I'd greatly appreciate it. Just for those of you who are speaking, there have been a few changes, last-minute changes to the order, just some folks who were having to leave early or couldn't be here on time, so it'll be slightly different than the order as advertised. I also wanted to mention we'll be having a meal afterwards, so I hope those of you who are able to will stick around to eat and to gather together and a little more socially. I know some of you as well are wondering, so I'll also say that aside from this event, Beyond Baroque is still closed. We're in the midst of some renovations for which we paused for this memorial. We hope to fully open after further renovations in around mid-January. We're still making a final decision about that. Learned, if nothing else, to be flexible over the past year. I did want to thank all of our staff who are here for helping making sure the space is welcoming for this event, in particular Jimmy, Maya, Yvonne, and Megan, and most especially to Dan McNay, who is in the midst of leading our renovations and redesign of this space. Yes. That we have this space at all, we owe very much to Fred, and to the work he put into securing Beyond Baroque's long-term lease in 2009, and to his years of community building. Unless I'm mistaken, I am the only person who will speak at this tribute who didn't know Fred personally. And yet I feel intimately connected to him. I work every day in this building, which he left to Beyond Baroque. I sit amidst the books he published and often explore the archive he preserved. I've come to know the friends he made and the artists whose career he helped nurture. And I'm surrounded by the community he helped build. And I know too, better than almost anyone, what it means to give your time, your labor, your energy to poets and artists in a society that often neglects them. So please understand how deeply I mean that when I say, for all that you have given in your life to Beyond Baroque, Fred, we thank you. One way in which we'd like to say thanks is by gathering so many of Fred's friends and family here for this memorial. Another way is by ensuring that Fred's commitment to an engaged intellectual public life remains a part of Beyond Baroque's programming and culture. I'm therefore very pleased to announce the formation of the Fred Dewey Legacy Project, which has been created by an international team dedicated to preserve Fred's intellectual legacy. My sincere thanks to Brooks Roddan, Lucas Reiner, Renee Petropoulos, Jeremiah Day, and Sue Spade for forming this group, of which Beyond Baroque is a partner. You'll find brochures describing the project available in the lobby. I think you all got them when you came in, as well as a short piece of Fred's writing that Jeremiah has included. I think he'll be talking about that in his remembrance of Fred. Here at Beyond Baroque, we hope to create an ongoing series of around-the-table readings of around key works of social, philosophical, political, and literary theory, as well as a series of lecture in Fred's name. You can think of no better way to remember Fred than by extending the work he did here for new generations. We have Fred's books for sale in the bookstore, as well as the books he edited through Beyond Baroque Books. The proceeds from those sales will go to this legacy project. I do hope you'll check those out just to see Fred's work as well. Thank you all for coming. I think the only thing I'd like to do is to introduce our co-host and organizer of this tribute, Amélie Frank. Amélie has done an immense amount of work of putting this together. So thank you, Amélie, for that. Everyone, thank you for being here. Please welcome Amélie Frank.
I always feel so wonderful when I take the mask off and just reveal my smile. It just feels, and I think Fred would appreciate this, it feels incredibly sexy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Quentin. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Let me give you a rundown of what we're going to do, because we want to keep it brief. We really do, so that we can hear everybody's voice. You go over the 4-minute allotment. I bonk you with the pumpkin. Okay, this pumpkin here is for bonking purposes. I will take responsibility for sterilizing the mic after I introduce each person. All right, so I'll be sterilizing it and then I'll be tossing over there. So I'm going to bring up everybody. I will begin by reading a very short paragraph from Fred's book, The School of Public Life. Much larger book on the ideas of what it means to be the people, to have a public life, to have a government, to have community. But I like what he wrote here. He said, civil society is where people work things out in that old cliche of little league sports for kids, in helping a friend, in volunteering to help a neighbor in distress, in clearing up a sidewalk or moving trash cans for pickup, solving a problem on the block, in trimming a tree or bush, in admitting in a gathering, yes, perhaps I did make a mistake, or no, I didn't know that was the case. This is the beginning of civility. And that reaches me so much because, first of all, community has always been the touchstone of Beyond Baroque, of the Wednesday night workshop, of poetry in Southern California, and of people outside of the community, like community organizers, elected officials, who work hand in hand with us. This is what Fred believed in. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say today about Fred. The first person I am going to bring up to give us our invocation is from the church in Ocean Park, the Reverend Janet Gollery McKeithen. Please welcome her.
I'm honored to be among you this afternoon to celebrate the life of such a wonderful man. Let's take just a moment to recognize the sacred and the holy that is already a part of our community here today. Creative spirit among and within us, we come today as friends and family of Fred Dewey, grateful for the blessing of relationships and memories, grateful for what he made possible for us personally and for what he provided for Venice and the wider community. His death is what brought us out here today, but it is his life which is the real reason we gather. In these sacred moments together this afternoon, we grieve our loss of his presence among us. We grieve for what might have been. Fred Dewey provided a space to express the deepest part of ourselves. He helped us connect with each other to share our perspectives of the world and of life. He helped us expand our understanding of ourselves and the world. Fred Dewey helped create a strong community. He helped us express ourselves in the present and imagine the future. He helped us create a sacred, welcoming community that isn't afraid of pain and suffering, or joy and laughter. The words in this sacred space help us to listen to the world all around us, in all of its dimensions, the agony, the ecstasy, the in-between, and then imagine a better future. There is a sacred space in this room today. It's a spirit that Fred Dewey embodied. It's a creative spirit that accompanies us in our suffering and our grief. Creative spirit among and within us. In the midst of our grieving, you are here. We know that love never ends. When all else fails, there is still love. We lift up each other in our need and for all anywhere who grieve with us this day. To those who doubt, we send light. To those who are weak, strength. To all who sorrow, peace. I invite you to acknowledge with me the shared spirit that is already a part of our gathering.
Amen, and thank you, Janet. Thank you so much for coming out here today. It means so much to all of us. Beyond Baroque has a very warm and long-standing relationship with the church in Ocean Park, and we're so glad to have her here today. All right. Next up, I am delighted to be bringing up I think one of the finest people to represent this district, basically in Los Angeles history. I think he deserves an extra special cleaning. I look to him as a leader who speaks out for all, not only of the included members of our community, our eclectic community, but the outsiders and the people most in need. And he worked tirelessly with me and Richard Modiano and Fred Dewey and Bill Rosendahl to get that lease nailed down. Please give it up for Councilman Mike Bonin.
Thank you, Amélie, for the intro and for the extra special cleaning. And thank you, everybody, for being here today to celebrate the life and the legacy and the vision and the mission of Fred. And I say mission because I always got from Fred a sense that he had a mission. And that mission was to spread poetry and to spread truth. You know, artists and poets walk through the world a little bit differently than most of us, without some of the blinders that we put on in our everyday lives. And so they feel things and see things more intently than the rest of us. And from that comes the obligation to spread truth and to share truth. And that was always the mission I got from Fred Dewey. Now, I intersected with Fred as a government official. And I think those of you who knew Fred would not be surprised to understand that interacting with government probably did not bring out the most joyous side of his persona. But there are times when it did. I dealt with Fred in government at a time when it certainly did not, and a time when it did. And I'll talk about the not first. Amélie talked about the the lease negotiations to get the long-term lease for this building that was signed when I was working for Bill Rosendahl. Most of you are old enough to remember, as I do, the Camp David Accords in the late 1970s, when Carter brought Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat together, and they had that historic moment where they all held hands and joined together. This was as difficult as that, if not more so. This was a discussion. Bill was very determined that both Beyond Baroque and LA Theater Works be here, and trying to negotiate what that was going to look like, how that was going to work, was really, really difficult. Fred, by nature, was not a compromiser, so this was difficult to get from point A to point B. But I never sensed that Fred was being stubborn for stubborn's sake. Or that he was being territorial for territorial's sake. I think Fred really, truly believed that poetry deserved this whole space, and that poetry needed this whole space, and that we in Los Angeles needed poetry to fill up all of not just this building, but all of Los Angeles. So perhaps in the next lease negotiations we can expand Fred's vision and get that done. The second memory of Fred goes back a little bit earlier when I was working for Ruth Galanter. We were spending millions of dollars to renovate the Venice Boardwalk. And in the middle of that, we decided that we were going to create the Venice Beach Poets Monument, and that we were going to select selections of poetry from Venice-connected poets and put them on the walls of the buildings down at Venice Beach, carve them into the walls. And who better to put that together than Fred? And I got to meet with Fred a lot over that, both over how much he insisted we pay Beyond Baroque to do it. But Fred was committed to take this 20-something kid I was at the time and educate me about every poem we were going to use, about every poet we were going to use. And in his teachings of me, there was such a love and an enthusiasm and a joy. And frankly, I think a hint of disappointment and resentment that he had to explain this stuff to me, because I think he felt like everybody should know this, because it's that important and that vital. So today on Venice Beach, the words of those poets, some of whom are here today, are carved in those walls. And at the end of that event, as we were reopening Venice Beach in the year 2000, after it had been closed for about a year, we decided we were going to have an art and music festival. And so we decided that it would only be appropriate to the true history of Venice and the relationship to the beats and the history of poetry in Venice, that we would open that celebration with poetry. And so Fred helped pull together getting John Thomas and Philomene Long to come and do readings to open that festival and that celebration, and to reconsecrate Venice Beach to the importance of poetry, the importance of the spoken word, and the importance of telling the truth. So the spirit of Fred lives on, the legacy lives on, and it's our obligation to carry on the mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Councilman Bonin. Next, I would be delighted to bring up the artist in residence here at Beyond Baroque. He has been here for quite a while as an artist in residence, and Fred was one of his big champions, and I would like everybody to please give a warm welcome to Will Alexander.
Thank you for this auspicious event, and Amélie, and for all of you here today, all the great poets here. I wanted to say that Fred is like, this is like running in NASA in a certain way, because from the community shoots to the epic shoots, the complication of the artist and the negotiations of space, psychic space. So I wanted to for his great support, not only myself, but of the art form, which is very important in a society like this. It seems to be awash with bores in Rome and capybaras in the outskirts of rich homes in Argentina. Things are changing in the world, but he was negotiating a crazy ship, and he did it well. And I want to read a poem here that may work with him, called The Deluge in Formation. If one believes oneself as stasis, there exists no seepage, no neural density or scar. One then saturates as ash, as pointless cannibal's lethargy, as dislodged ink from podium or a treatise. One comes to know demobility as a craft, as an arc which solders itself to specifics. Yet to know one's non-sequestered through mundane advancement as doorway or basic habit as speculation. I am speaking of chastisement or cross-referential superimposition. Within this condition, I am more like a crow from crucial underwater fires, a crucial underwater crow, neither Chinese nor Shinto, but of the black dimensionality as hidden underwater mass, which persists by daring, which seems at the surface a purposeless kinetic or pointless mandrel's infection. Saying such, I consider myself a reddish Shinto crow, then just as strongly a black anathema crow, then just as quickly a sun-fed crow from snow-washed volcanoes. So I look to myself as winter, as inclement carrion monger, as flight through great electrical haze. I, being blur, who shapes the Empyrean, who evokes withdrawal, who instills in his forces stunning psychic transference. And Fred was involved with this stunning psychic transference, bringing this energy slowly bringing this energy into the world community, which is most important for this world that we're in. And I thank you all, the great poets and all the supporters of Beyond Baroque, and thank you. Fred.
Oh, Will Alexander, you do move us so. Thank you so much. I would like to bring up next somebody who participated with Fred in the World Festival, and it was a project of excitement and interconnectedness and profound joy for all of those who participated. And so A.K. Toney wanted to make sure that he got to speak about that today, and I am so delighted that he is here. So, got it all cleaned up for you. Please welcome A.K. Toney.
Hi, everybody. It's really great to see so many people show up for Fred. Before I wrote a piece for Fred, but before I begin, I just want to say this. Fred, he was probably one of the main people that turned around and advocated to having me as a poet in residence here. But I didn't know the bigger picture. And the bigger picture was that there was a partnership between Poets and Writers Incorporated, and there was an exchange of poets from Beyond Baroque to the world stage. And there was a sort of symbiotic relationship that made what we call a connection of communities, a connection of literary communities. And that's one of the things I really remember about Fred. But when I found out about him passing, I had seen Fred about a month before, and it was just through passing. And I was at a jazz concert, and he was passing by with his friends, and I was outside smoking my cigarette with some friends. And then I remember seeing him, and we hugged, we embraced, and we told each other we loved each other. He had to move on. He didn't really make any time to say, we'll keep in touch or whatever, or something of that nature, which let me know we didn't know that much about Fred. If you saw him, he was a very introverted person, but at the same moment and same time, extroverted in his actions of what he cared about and what he was passionate about. And working with him with the World Beyond Festival, bringing together 100 poets, including a couple of poets from out of state, 2 or 3. I know 2 of those poets were Amir Baraka and Oscar Brown Jr. And I'd never seen them in a room together, ever. And all I can say is Fred was a dear friend of mine. And I remember being a poet in residence here and doing workshops and working in the bookstore. But the most important thing I remember about Fred is that he was a genuine friend. I don't know how many people were as close to Fred as I can't say I was that close to him, but whenever I was with him, whenever I was in his presence, I felt like I was very close to him. So I'm going to read this piece, and it's called Epistle of Dewy Drops. Word dripped from ether in action. He came from the nature of it. Philosophy in the reign of collecting and presenting poetry, writings he felt were needed by communities beyond a beach. Beyond Baroque reached an era of connections that made a world beyond for my world stage. He is my cigarette sharer for talks about jazz, appreciator of verse, not his own, not his hue, not of his knowing. Remember my last moment with him passing in serendipity. These are good in our hearts, of not knowing what is taking the body. Spirit of making funding to bring Amir Baraka and Oscar Brown Jr. together just by suggestion and relationship of executive director and resident poet intern. Our moments are more than Los Angeles book festivals, poetry festivals, poetry readings, publishing, and performance. We were the dewdrops of sound and ink, a muse for a resource of belief. He settled in the background, moist and beautiful, to keep poetry and writers alive with supple, to keep us and comfort the value of voice. He made me understand empathy like water, flowing and connecting by authenticity, not misappropriation. The tears Fred ever shared for me were of happiness because of presence. Never knew what that meant until now. The letters halter to fall because others pick up pens to sustain. Raining from dewy drops, moisturizing our fountains, tongues streaming beneath rocks and rivers to keep everyone flowing. Ashe, Fred. Ashe.
Thank you, A.K. Toney. Fred and I were close. There were aspects of his life I was familiar with, such as he loved to go hiking. He loved spending time out in the wilderness. He actually had an outward bound group that he once led in the wilderness, and they had to solve some survival problems while they were out there. And they got stuck in a canyon and couldn't figure out a way out. And it was Fred who went off to go and think about it on a boulder one day and came up with a route that would get everybody in his group safely out of that snag before it got dark. So Fred wasn't afraid to challenge himself in the wilderness. A lot of people don't know about that he was very physically active. And one sweet thing that most people did not know, and I know nothing about the circumstances, and all I'm going to say is this: in the last few months of his life, Fred Dewey was very deeply in love. And I couldn't ask for anybody to be in a better space in their heart than that. So remember that about him. Okay, now the thing about wiping these down is my mask is starting to now smell like Windex. So what do you do when the next person you're bringing up is Brendan Constantine? Sorry, Brendan. I am so thrilled that Brendan Constantine, who has taught here, who has had so many phenomenal readings here, who has done so many exciting artistic things here, and really is just one of the great voices and beacons to the rest of the country and the world about what kind of poetry Southern California can produce. Brendan is here, so please welcome him.
That's a hell of an introduction. Thank you very much. As Rick Lupert would say, frankly, I'm already disappointed, aren't you? Just going to make sure that I keep track of my time here. Fred would want me to. I didn't really prepare a poem or anything particularly momentous to say, but I've been thinking a great deal about confirmation. And I knew that I had to perform the very small ritual of thanking Fred in the presence of his friends and family. Fred allowed me to have a career at all. An important part of learning something is having it confirmed. Even if you think you know, even if you're certain that you're right about the answer you have in your heart, the lesson isn't done until it's confirmed, until someone says yes. When you write a poem and it connects, something's been confirmed for you. If you're the person who connected with that poem, that poet has confirmed something for you. And we are all the more alive in that moment. And I have to confirm Fred's kindness to me and his faith in me, something that I didn't really always feel up to. And I've never had someone in his position take that kind of care of me. I've never, before or since, met somebody who said, you know what, I have a reading series. Is there anybody you've always wanted to read with? And I said, yes. He says, well, let's go get them, and we'll bring them to Beyond Baroque. And I've never had somebody ask me my opinion or ask for my help. And I think one of the greatest ways to share love is to let someone help you. Anyway, all I wanted to add to this is that there's going to be a break today, and we're going to have refreshments and talk, and then there'll be more sharing. If you knew Fred, if you had him in your life at all, I would ask that during that break, you take the time to share with somebody else what it was that Fred confirmed for you. What did he make real? He constantly validated, vindicated, and confirmed my desire to be an artist in this city. If you talked to him at a reading, if he gave you a reading, if he invited you to one, if you stood in line somewhere, if you bought a membership, if you had a really good fight with him, he confirmed something for you. And if we continue to share that today, if you just talk a little bit about it with somebody else today, then you're performing that small ritual, the thing that we all hope that someone will do for us after we're gone, which is to just confirm and confirm and confirm that we were here. Thank you.
want to pause and take just a breath right after that. Thank you, Brendan. The next poet we are bringing up is a poet who has been in the community a long time. And she is part of an important collective of poets who publish here. And she often referred to Fred, certainly in talking with me about him, as like an older brother taking interest in her work and looking for opportunities for her to share her work. And I couldn't agree more with Fred's emphasis on her work because she is a fine poet and part of the Cahuenga Press. Please welcome Phoebe Mcadams.
Thank you, Quentin, and thank you, Amélie, and thank you, Fred, for all that you have done. We would not be here in this space without you. But I want to, on a slightly lighter note, how many of you remember the old chairs in Beyond Baroque? One of Fred's great gifts to us was noticing the chairs that were being thrown out at the Santa Monica courthouse. He brought those chairs to Beyond Baroque in spite of his misgivings. Apparently, he thought art should be uncomfortable. We should be awake, not comfy. Beyond Baroque had the worst, the most uncomfortable chairs anywhere. They made you think twice about coming here. Was it worth it to hear so-and-so to creak home with bad backs and knees? The new chairs were like a gift from the literary gods. It didn't hurt to sit down here anymore. You could enjoy the readings. I didn't know Fred really well, but we came from the same part of New York City, and we went to similar schools. Fred did kind of adopt me. He made me feel treasured and loved, like a sister. He was always happy to see me, always welcoming, and it was incredibly important to me. 2 short personal stories. I belong to All Saints Church in Pasadena. It's not something I talk about a lot. After all, not very many people I know go to church, even a big radically liberal church like All Saints. One day I was standing outside waiting to go into the service, and there was Fred. It turns out he came there often, having been brought there by his aunt, who is here today. And so we began a regular meeting, standing outside many Sundays and discussing the Episcopal Church and our new rector, who we had a lot of misgivings about. And so we had these long, in-depth conversations about things, and I looked forward to Sundays with Fred when he was there, one of my few church literary community connections. And my second personal story about Fred is one that I am extremely grateful to him for. My ex-husband, the poet and local LA River activist, Louis McAdams, developed Parkinson's disease several years before he passed away. Well, Fred was at my house for a gathering one day, and he came rushing over to me, distraught and upset. "What is wrong with Louis?" he said. And I said, "Well, you know, Fred, he's just getting older. You haven't seen him in a while." And that's what Louis always said. "No, it isn't that," Fred said. He insisted that Louis's face looked frozen, that he was walking in this weird, halting way, and that there was something seriously wrong. It was almost impossible to get Louis to a doctor, but I alerted the family, and we realized Fred was right. We dragged Louis to the doctor, and that is how Louis's Parkinson's was diagnosed before it got worse. So Fred, eternal gratitude for that. You were the advance warning for our family. Thank you, Fred. Thank you for it all.
Several of Fred's family are here today. If it is possible, could you just stand up to let us know that you see? Thank you so much for being here. Aside from Phoebe, I never got to meet any of Fred's family. Most of us didn't. But today, Fred's family is seeing Fred's other family, and this is just a small portion of it. So I would like to invite his brother, John Dewey, to come up and speak next. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, everybody. This is quite a thing that's been put on. My thoughts today are on the different worlds we create and live in, and I knew Beyond Baroque was a world of its own out here, but it's clear from just the people who've spoken already how enormous this particular world of his is, and especially if this is just a tiny sliver of it. Fred and I were 9 years apart, and he was born in 1957. I was born in 65. We both went to the same elementary school in New York, but he was gone by the time I started. Different worlds. You know, I was in his shadow. He had excelled in literary parts there with the words. I was a dyslexic. It made for very different footsteps. And when we spent summers in Nantucket, but by the time I was paying attention and had any memory, he had long since defected from that place and didn't come back for decades. So we really lived in separate worlds, and we got along. So as two brothers, we never really fought. The first time we fought was in '84 when he and I drove out here. That was when he moved from New York to LA. I think he already had the job working in Roger Corman's studio as one of his many slaves or junior production assistants or something like that. And I was coming out to see friends, and we had our first real fight as brothers. I blew up his tune box trying to wire it into the old Volvo station wagon he was driving across country in. And it was a good 1,000 or 2 miles before we were pleasant to each other. We moved into a hotel, which I was trying to remember the name of it, across from Fredericks of Hollywood on the boulevard. It was a transient hotel. We had former inmates and recovering addicts living with us. And that was, we stayed with him for a couple months and then left him here in LA. And that was the beginning of his life, that he ended up on 2nd Street eventually. Even a few years ago, I wasn't really aware of the scope of the different worlds that Fred had. While he was sick in the hospital, all of us, one or two from each of those separate worlds came together on a very, we started coming together. There was an email list going around that grew slowly, but I think pretty much everybody on that list except I guess for you all here in Beyond Baroque. The rest of us in all the other worlds thought we might be the only one in that world for him. I mean, it was, somebody was saying about how he was your friend, how he was such a friend. And he did that, but somehow he also gave you this sense like if you weren't there, there'd be nothing or something like that. The family kind of worried about that a little bit. You know, I think a lot of people did. And so in the hospital, we all started discovering each other. And it was a real eye-opening experience. You know, Fred lived in the art world, the New York East Village, late 70s club band scene. He studied semiotics at Brown. I know what Brown is. You know, he was in LA politics, neighborhood councils, philosophy, Hannah Arendt, Berlin, Brussels, Blue Ridge, Appalachia. Each one of those worlds was pretty isolated from, you know, Fred, that was Fred, right? Somebody described him walking off to do something else, and he didn't mingle those. And even in the mountains, I'm down there wrapping up his life there, and the number of so this is Appalachia, it's in a nice Toney town, but it's still Appalachia, and the number of mountain people and locals that are kind of coming out of the woodwork to say Fred was an incredible friend of his. I don't know how he did it, right? It's amazing how he befriended so many people there. Each one of these worlds was rich. You find anyone from any of them, and they'll describe his deep engagement and focused investment of his time and his intelligence, and engagement so strong and helpful that one assumed it was the only world. But he had a way of meeting people where they were. I've already heard that twice from other people, that he knew he had a disability to see where any individual was and really meet them on their terms. And that, I think, went into his being such a good teacher and being, knowing what those people needed next, what compassion they needed, what intellectual body of knowledge they needed to know. In the last months of his life, and in this time after his death, we've all been awed by the number of other people that had that to say about him. We all have our own, okay, thank you. We all have our own forms of grief. As a brother, as a nephew, as an in-law, as a friend, as a colleague, a mentor, or a mentee. But with Fred, there's another form of grief, not based on love, but one based in respect for a truly great mind and an intellect of rare and infrequent occurrence. An intellectual guide that was focused on moving others forward, and far more than us here have lost that. It's not, I think that's something that the world's lost. You know, it's a heartbreaking loss. We lost the writer, the philosopher, the civic organizer, the executive director, the teacher, and the sibling. Having seen all these worlds, it's, you know, Fred defied characterization. Now, maybe he didn't to this world because you saw him for so long in this role, but to the rest of us in all our other worlds, he did. You know, he didn't have a resume, and he really kind of felt strongly about that. Maybe he did, but it's only turned up much later. Reflecting him on them all and over the years, all those worlds. Someone described him as a public intellectual, and this is not my world. I'm not a poet, and I had to kind of figure out what a public intellectual was. And I think it's right. It's not a pundit, not on Twitter or Facebook, not even with a website with his work on it. He's a public intellectual of old that worked with the written word. I'll end with one last insight, and it was about his engagement with others. Fred believed that the only true meaning existed when people engaged with each other. The only true thinking, the only time thinking, what he called true thinking, could take place was within that engagement. Even if you read the book and had ideas, it didn't count as thinking until you were talking about it with someone else. And he would only teach Hannah Arendt by sitting and reading it line by line with his students. he refused to let somebody read it and come in and talk about what they had read. The group discussing the meaning and coming to understandings shared or in opposition, that was what mattered to him. The meaning formed in the engagement. And if Beyond Baroque isn't an example of that, I don't know what is. It was only in that engagement that we could self-govern, that we could grow, that the world could be moved forward. All these different worlds, and in the last year, in his final months, they came together. It was confusing to all of us that aren't in this world, and it was really confusing to Fred. At first, he'd be in the hospital, and there'd be people from two different worlds there, and he'd look perplexed, and then he'd smile, and trying to figure out why this was happening. But it made him very happy. So death sometimes does that. It brings family together, unites lost friends, brings attention to a life's work. And I think that's what's happened here. It's a silver lining in an otherwise lousy dark cloud. I love you, Fred. I miss you. A great many of us do. And if the future were able to, it would miss you too, because the future needed you to stick around a whole lot longer than you got to. Thank you.
Among the family members, is Gordon Dewey here? Yeah, Gordon over here, I have been told, is the one who takes most after Fred, by the way. So that young gentleman over there is the one carrying the future for us. It's nice to have you here, Gordon. I wanted to say that we found out at the last minute that we didn't have flowers, and so I went to go pick up flowers, and I told Lynn we really define flowers that evoke Fred. And so I found something here that reminded me of his very long ponytail. Now, do we remember what the pumpkin is for? You go too long, you get bonked. All right. Next up is a poet who is a very good friend of Fred's. He had deep affection for her, and I'm so glad that she has made it here today. Please welcome Judith Taylor.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here, but very sad also. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Fred, my friend of many years. Fred threw his heart and soul and commitment into his political and cultural work, and in his relations with his close friends, he was all in too. I thought I'd share a few passages from Fred's email correspondence with me as a way of conjuring them up for us today. I'll read 3 short passages from an email late July of 20. As these show, Fred continued to live with courage and zest even when ill. I found a couple of great doctors at St. John's John Wade Institute. November and December were hell, but with pleasant interludes, like reading Walter Benjamin at home, Christmas Eve and day. Time goes by like I don't know what. I wake up and another week has gone by, and it's recycling day again, Groundhog Day, following the horrid news. But really, Judith, it's not all bad. I am actually glad to be here to witness what's happening. Those Portland folks may be starting something very, very big. The moms in yellow t-shirts, yay, and that following on Black Lives Matter, which is absolutely great. I have been working hard publishing articles, and I feel better than I have in a long while. The meds even have me writing poems. Can you believe it? Me? They didn't tell me that was a side effect. My first poem was called Daffodils. Seriously, as my dear friend in New York, Al, said to me the other day when I mentioned the poem, Oh no, not daffodils again. Whenever Fred was mentioning a friend in these emails, it always had the adjective dear in front of their name. He had so much affection for his friends. Last fall and early this year, we discussed films a lot. Fred studied film and film theory in college and was sophisticated about the way a film is made and shaped. He loved films, from extravagant American action films to foreign classics to difficult experimental ones. Once when I told him about a course in screwball comedies I was teaching, he said I absolutely had to include Howard Hawks' comedy Ball of Fire. I was surprised he even knew this wacky screwball comedy, but I shouldn't have been. He loved such a wide range of films and was such a discerning moviegoer. The penultimate time we spoke, it was about Tarkovsky films. The next day after the Zoom, and the next one after that, Fred wrote me short emails. He was excited I was exploring one of his most beloved filmmakers and just didn't want the conversation to end. Here's one. You have some great cinema ahead of you. Wow. An astonishing, unparalleled, astonishing body of work. I think it is good you started with Solaris. Most don't, but it is the most blatantly conceptual of all his works. It blew my mind when I saw it as an 18-year-old. No one will ever equal Tarkovsky. It's impossible. And that is truly something. XX, Fred. How I wish we could have kept this conversation going for so much longer, my dear friend, Fred.
Judith, thank you so much. It's good to know that his final months were still filled with vitality and enthusiasm for work, the things he enjoyed doing most. For those unacquainted with Beyond Baroque, this building right here is the fire department. And that's why we get the engines. And over here, this used to be the police department. And we were the city hall. So that's why we get a lot of firemen action. That's why you'll see these hunky men walking around and you're wondering why. They're firemen. I would like to bring up next Simone Forti, fine poet that Fred deeply, deeply admired. So much so that I believe we published one of your books, did we not? We did. And do you want to come up here, or do you want me to bring the microphone to you? If we could bring the microphone to her, please, yes. Simone was an extra special favorite of Fred's, so I'm really, really glad she was able to make it today. So please welcome her. And Simone, if you could take off your mask so we can hear you.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Amélie, and thank you, Quentin, and thank you, Fred. As I've been listening to these tributes, I knew that Fred was a very profound and very large figure. But somehow it's so moving to get a better idea of the depth and the breadth of his spirit and his work. I have here, Fred Dewey is an important mentor to me, rather than was. That's okay, I'm flapping paper because I've got Parkinson's. Fred Dewey is an important mentor to me. For a period of several years, we were close friends. Once, as we were hiking in Will Rogers State Park, I showed him a short piece I had written, and subsequently he asked me to show him everything I had. Days later, Fred returned it all to me, separated into a yes pile and a no pile. Eventually, with Fred's editorial guidance, the yes pile became the book O Tongue. To this day, I sometimes ask myself in which pile Fred would put something I've just written, and why. I still feel Fred's presence. It's hard to understand that he's gone. And that's all I have to say. And I feel the love that we have collectively for Fred. Thanks.
Simone, it's a huge honor to have you here today. Really, I'm so moved to be sitting with you and glad to have you here. Thank you so much. Next up, we are going to be bringing up someone who has been affiliated with Beyond Baroque for quite a long time, and I'm delighted she was able to make it today. Could you please welcome Kraus?
Thanks. Fred became one of my closest friends when I moved here to LA in the mid-90s. He lived in the same one-bedroom apartment in Santa Monica that he'd settled in about a decade before, with every inch of the wall covered with books, sometimes 2 or 3 deep. He'd moved here from New York, but he didn't miss it at all. He completely embraced the possibility of reinventing yourself and your life in LA. Fred read histories, novels, economics, philosophies, and he was engaged in a great syncretic work that would explain everything, that he eventually distilled into the more digestible books that we have here with us today. He drove an old Volvo DL sedan with a vanity license plate that said Freedom X. He was a great believer in social justice, art, innovation, democracy. The great-grandson of the philosopher, educator, and social reformer John Dewey, and he took his ancestors' humanist syncretic views completely to heart. In this sense, Fred was someone who lived outside of his time. He was a Renaissance person, someone who truly believed that a library card could be used to access the world. Fred didn't just recognize contradictions, he lived them, and often painfully so. He loved art, but he hated the art world. He understood and denounced America's fundamental legacy of racism, exploitation, imperialism, but he believed in the power of citizenship. He felt strong in these beliefs, and often alone. But during the years that we were close, Fred found people to dream with and work with. He began a wonderful project with Coagula magazine editor Matt Gleason, the irreverent art magazine best known for its tagline, "Most Art Sucks," running a regular column under his pen name, Freedom X. But most importantly, he became the executive director here at Beyond Baroque, and it was here that he channeled all of his knowledge and beliefs into the promotion of poetry, putting Beyond Baroque back on the map, making it truly reflect this incredible city. He was a powerful supporter of some of the greatest writers to come out of LA, from Ellen Mabey to Wanda Coleman. More than anyone else that I know, Fred had the ability to truly listen. You felt yourself getting larger in his presence, as if at last you were seen, you were heard. I will miss him forever. He was the most gentle, compassionate soul and the most loyal friend.
Chris, thank you for giving us that survey of the so many different areas that Fred was involved in. And he was so enthusiastic about unifying everything, tying everything together, including people So this brings us to a halfway point in our program, and we're going to bring up Irene Suico Soriano. And what's important about this is that nearly 20 years ago, we're 18 years off right now, we had a historic photograph taken here. What are we pointing at? Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Okay, yes, I know it's there, and it's got bubble wrap on it. Okay. When I first proposed to Fred that we needed to do a documentary photograph of all the people who were in the community at the time, Fred said, get yourself a committee to help you do it. And he made suggestions. He said, get people who represent all the different wide communities in Los Angeles poetry, and that included everything from, you know, the African American community, the Asian American community, cowboy poetry. I got a hold of cowboy poets. I got a hold of teachers. I went through all these different groups. And one of the people who was incredibly helpful to me in this regard was Irene. Irene served on one of my committees and was tireless in helping me to contact poets I couldn't myself get a hold of. And we're going to be making a special presentation in just a moment to commemorate what I consider one of Fred's great accomplishments as a director here. So first, Irene, please come up and join us.
I'd like to first thank Quentin and Amélie for making space in the program for me to share some of my brief thoughts about Fred. Just to provide context, I worked with Fred Dewey in 2000 to co-curate the World Beyond Poetry Festival that Beyond Baroque played lead organization alongside other literary and art organizations of color that included Self-Help Graphics, The World Stage, and the organization I was affiliated with, representing the Asian Pacific American community, Isurima and Disorient Magazine. According to the press release that went out at the time, the festival's aim was to bring together the voices and communities of Los Angeles. There were 6 of us working tirelessly, to get this 5-day poetry festival in different venues across the city take flight. A.K. Toney, Jeff McDaniels, Felicia Montez, Michael Datcher, and Imani Tolliver. We met many times. We're talking 100 poets strewn across Los Angeles, $15,000 distributed in honoraria, plus making sure that all the venues were set up okay and all the promotional materials were in place. It could have easily been one big mess, but it was not. Fred believed in building public spaces, and I so appreciate that he approached other grassroots arts and literary community groups like Isurima to do the bridge building with other communities through this festival. This was the first event that I was involved in that was able to bring Asian Pacific American poets in concert with other poets in LA at the scale it did. By writing and submitting that grant to the NEA, having that vision and foresight truly made something magical in the spirit of unity building happen one summer in 2000. Thank you, Fred. And it was an excellent training ground for me to learn how literary organizations functioned and how to produce large-scale poetry events. Fred's focus and energy and can-do attitude was a force to be reckoned with. All the planning, coordination involved would have driven anyone mad, but Fred kept that ship steady, always professional and gracious. I wish I had stayed in touch through the years. Rest in peace and power, Fred Dewey.
much in the same way Fred Dewey mentored me. I'm just a girl from the valley, okay? So, like, you know, you come from the valley and you're trying to learn how to be part of, like, you know, this community. And you say, like, oh my God, Fred, what are you going to do? And Fred said, go out and meet the communities. Show up. Drive out to meet the people. Don't expect them to come to you. Huge lesson. One I eagerly embraced. I like to go out and meet new people. But it made it important for me to contact all these communities and meet all these new people and organizations so that in April of 2003, we gathered almost 300 of the region's poets for an historic photograph. Now, that photograph was shot over here by Mark Savage, who is going to come up and join me. And Mark is going to make a presentation of a gift to Quentin, who now needs to come up here and be with me. Come on up, Quentin. Mark is presenting us with a new version of the portrait to commemorate Fred's role in making this possible. When you look at it today and you consider how many of those poets have left us, it was an important and timely document. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Amélie. I've looked at this photo, an older version of it, many times up in our office. It's faded. I'm really glad to have this back because it's an incredible document of the poetry community. In 2003, is that what you said it was?
2003. Was it 2002? I thought it was 2003. We're close.
Whatever. But
I'm having a senior moment.
we'll try and put it out in the lobby so everyone, I think a good number of folks here are in that picture, so maybe you'll see yourselves in it as you go out. So thank you, Mark, so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I don't get to pop the bubbles. Thank you, gentlemen. I would like to bring up next an important colleague of Fred's who worked hard with him on that book I read from earlier this afternoon. A good friend of his, and we're really glad that he is here today. Please welcome Jeremiah Day. It's all wiped for you.
Sorry, I didn't know that that's where I was in the order. It's really an honor to be here and think about the World Beyond Festival. I came up to Beyond Baroque and the lawn was covered with Harleys because the former head of the Hells Angels was giving a reading, and then the next night was Amiri Baraka, and then we went to East LA. I think I had been to East LA maybe once before ever and never welcomed before. I remember you very well. And I think we talk about speaking truth, but I think that one of the tough lessons of the World Beyond Festival was that there was only one. And I think we can't sugarcoat the difficulties of the situation. And so I worked a lot with Fred after he left Beyond Baroque in Europe, and so I wanted to share two stories very shortly. One was, actually it kind of starts in the bookstore, was Fred really thought a lot about what he was doing here in relationship to what it was like to be in Eastern Europe in the 1970s and 80s. In a moment when there's an official system which doesn't represent you, and there's an official cultural reality that doesn't represent the people and doesn't represent our problems and our experiences. And so he really spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff. Years later in Amsterdam, I introduced him to an artist, Taf Hassam, who had been to the Czech Republic and had spent a lot of time looking at the plastic people of the universe and these examples. And Taf Hassam named his art space after Fred's pamphlet, Polis for New Conditions. He named it New Conditions. And then someone invited me to do something about the 40th anniversary of Charter 77, which I did. But I brought in Taf and I brought in Fred. And Fred wrote a small piece for the booklet, which Quentin has reproduced. And there was a moment then that somehow someone from Charter 77, one of the original dissidents, was in London, and he was invited to speak. And the question was, well, who should interview him? Which person around had the knowledge or the gravitas or the capacity to do it? And the only person was Fred. And it's interesting, Fred was not an academic in the field. He had no publishing on it, but he had done the work. He really knew the material. So he did this interview with this guy in London in a church, maybe about 100 people there, and he interviews the guy, and he said, well, you know, what did it mean for you to sign Charter 77, to sign this letter, to participate in this decision to go against the government? And the guy started talking about his daughter. And he said, well, you know, I had to think about my daughter was 5, and, you know, and I knew that if I made this decision, I was going to have these consequences for her, that it was going to change her life because I wouldn't be able to get a job anymore. And so he said, but then I thought, well, you know, if I don't do it, I won't be who I am anymore. And so if I don't sign this, I will cost her her father. And then Fred said, well, but you know, your situation was very different than ours. I mean, you lived in what people called the society of the lie. I mean, nobody here thinks we live in a society of the lie. I mean, raise your hand if you think we live in the society of the lie. And slowly but surely, everyone in this room in London raised their hands. And there was that confirmation that someone mentioned. And it was really something to go like, where are we now? Because Fred really believed that when people came together like this, because he actually believed in the people's capacity to make things happen, to organize things, to do things together. That's what links neighborhood councils, Charter 77, poetry, and another event he was a speaker at. He said, you know, it was a kind of an urbanistics thing. He said, you know, all it would take would be 5 people in this room to change this entire city. Seriously, 5 people, that's all it would take. That's all we had when we were organizing at the beginning of neighborhood councils, and we got it on the charter, and it changed the city. So look around, look at the person next to you. Figure out who would it be? Who would you work with? Who are the other people you would work with? I've had to think, we've been involved with this legacy project. Well, what do we preserve? What is there to preserve from Fred? And one of my colleagues in London, who used to run a commercial art gallery but has now changed it into a kind of a community project space because of Fred's influence, he said, well, it's not about the man. I mean, I liked the man and I'm going to miss him, but it's not about the man. It's about the work. It's about the vision. It's about the mission. It's about contributing to the greater good. It's about things that are going to be the consequences will happen after we're gone. And I was asking him, well, who should edit the unpublished writings? And he said, well, clearly Fred would want us to have a vote. We should all come together and like have a discussion about what's appropriate. And one of the things that people keep saying is like, well, it's about what we should do. And I have to think, although it's a little corny, I have to think about Gettysburg and Lincoln saying it is not for us to dedicate, but to be dedicated. And or the IWW organizer dies and he says, don't mourn, organize. And in the Hannah Arendt reading groups we were part of in the bookstore, Fred, we read that the polis is a form of organized memory. And so I was thinking last year, I was thinking, okay, so it's mourn and organize. Mourn and organize. So there's 5 people in this gathering have the capacity to change the city. Who are they? Who are we? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jeremiah, thank you for that. That was stirring and exciting because Fred's ideas are still viable and we can still do these today. And in fact, we're bloody gonna have to, aren't we? I mean, really, when you think about the next couple of elections, we had better know what we're doing. Okay, speaking of community organizers, I would like to bring up one who I got to work with directly while on the board at Beyond Baroque, a woman of tremendous experience and wisdom who taught me a number of really exciting and important things about what you do to be on a board, because, you know, like, you're a Valley girl and you don't know anything about, like, being on a board. I didn't. I really didn't. I'd never really been on a board before. And Suzanne Thompson came in and she would tell us the hard truths about what it is boards need to do. And so I welcome her now. I'm so glad to see her again in person. Please welcome Suzanne Thompson.
Thank you, Amélie. I'm really glad that this is happening today. The last time I talked to Fred was in February, and I just moved back from taking care of family in Orange County and lived right around the corner from Fred. And I said, let me get things together in the apartment and then I'll have you over. Well, then I called him, didn't get a response. I emailed him, didn't get a response. And I said, okay, he must have gone back to Berlin or something. And then I got the Facebook announcement that he had passed. So it was very devastating. He was a friend and a colleague. We worked together, as she said, on many projects and was very supportive of the Venice Arts Council. Emily Winters is here as well, and John Moody and from the Venice Arts Council. Are you over there? Okay. And whether it was for fundraisers or benefit for the poetry walls, the Venice Beach Poets Monument, or the Venice Japanese American Memorial Monument, or any kind of special celebration, he welcomed us. In 2008, the LA City Council considered eliminating Beyond Baroque's lease and some other organizations throughout the city. The budget plan would have suspended the nonprofit's existing $1 per year lease and forced them to pay at least 50% of the current market value of the building. Can you imagine what that would be like in Venice? Fred hired me as a consultant to help him secure renew a lease for Beyond Baroque. We had several meetings. His favorite meeting place was the Fig Tree at the Boardwalk before 8 a.m., 2-for-1 specials, and he could ride his bike from Ocean Park. I'll never forget one of our last meetings with Councilman Rosendahl at his West Side office regarding the lease renewal. Bill yelled at me and called me a troublemaker. You see, LA Theater Works is trying to take over the theater. And so it was very, very contentious. There were a lot of heavy hitters out there. And one of them was from a longtime friend who's now passed and a peace advocate and a human rights advocate, Stanley Scheinbaum, called me up and said, Suzanne, what are you doing? And I told Stanley, well, I'm helping to save Beyond Baroque for the community. Then I understand that upon one of Bill's visits to the home of his friend, Warren Beatty and Annette Benning, one of their daughters answered the door and pleaded with him, save Beyond Baroque. If anybody's here can tell me more about this, I think she took a class here. Anyway, it ultimately, we saved this through intense political lobbying campaigns and nationwide outreach effort that took place. The city voted 11-0, February 29th, 2008, to award this wonderful nonprofit a 25-year lease at $1 a year, ensuring its place in Venice for at least the next quarter of a century. A special thanks to Fred and Amélie and others that were still here today. And the other legacy of Fred's that he spoke to me a lot about, and I took on the campaign with the Venice Arts Council and started the Endangered Art Fund, was of poetry walls, which we renamed the Venice Beach. It was constructed in 2000, when as was said before, when the city renovated the Oceanfront Walk. Fred curated the walls, and there was, is Barbara and Jed here? Barbara, is Jed here too? Okay, they worked with Fred, or actually with the city, and from my understanding, and feel free to talk to them at the intermission, they were the ones that came up with the idea to put poetry on the walls, and then Fred was hired to curate the poets. And it consists of poetry fragments engraved on concrete walls of 18 poets from 4 different locations. The LA Police Department substation near Windward Plaza, and 3 public restrooms, exterior walls, 17th Street, Horizon, and Brooks. In the Argonaut May 31st, 2012 issue, Fred said, "Venice is precious, and I chose the poets for what will hopefully be only a first round of permanent boardwalk poems to reflect the area's history, depth, and promise. Culture can be protected in Los Angeles, and the poets are the voice of our substance." I have a list of the poets on the plazas and on the bathrooms. If anybody wants to know, I'd be happy to tell you more. But something that was very, Fred always brought me gifts when he'd come to visit me. And one of them that I pulled out was the pocket Thomas Merton. And if you don't know who he is, look him up. And I just decided to open, Pegarty knows, I just decided to open it up, and this is what I found, and I'm going to read, and it kind of connects with what some of the things people have already said today. "The deepest level of communication is not communication, but is communism. It is wordless, it is beyond words, it is beyond speech, it is beyond concept. Not that we discover a new unity, we discover an older unity. My dear brothers and sisters and queers, we are already one, but we imagine that we are not. And what we have to recover is our original unity. That we have to be is what we are." Thank you, Fred, and thank you, Beyond Baroque.
And thank you, Suzanne. We could not have done it without you. No question. Okay, next up, another Cahuenga poet, longtime advisor and friend of Fred, and a fellow board member. And there were some rough times. My first years on the board were rough, very rough. There were people on the board who were difficult and combative and not really focused on the mission of the institution, but more what kind of stepping stone being on the board could be. But not Bill Mohr. Bill Mohr has always kept his eye on the prize, and he always gave Fred just steadfast advice on how to keep things going when things looked really rough. So please, welcome Bill Mohr.
As many of you know, Beyond Baroque started as a publication project. Specifically, it was going to be a literary magazine, and only a literary magazine, edited by Beyond Baroque's founder, George Drury Smith. Over 50 years after the first issue of the magazine was published out of a storefront on West Washington Boulevard, now known as Abbot Kinney, we are gathered to honor the memory of one of the longest serving artistic directors of Beyond Baroque, Fred Dewey. I would like to pay tribute to Fred by sharing with you the questions he asked Vincent Ferrini in an interview that was published in Beyond Baroque magazine, volume 26, number 2, published in 2004. The entire issue was published by Fred, and the questions he posed to Ferrini remain exquisitely pertinent over a decade and a half later. What is a poem in action? Is it just your life? And how is that a poem? What is the role poetry plays in that? So do you think poetry comes out of place? How do you look at history? You yourself have lived through a tremendous poetic history, a history of a lot of great events and great poets. How do you look back on history in terms of other poets you've known and who have affected you? Given the situation of the media today and the contemporary cultural landscape saturated by media, what would your advice be for a young poet? What happens when people don't even know they have a community? How do they find that community? What's your title, No Fish, mean? The city is the thing you know the best, and it's the thing you can speak to other people the best about. It's what you can tell other people. It's your home. And what does that mean? Sounds like the alchemy of the human, of the universe. Do you fish? You ever go out on the water? What do you find when you go out there? We have a different ocean on this coast. Have you ever been to Los Angeles before? What do you think the equivalent of fish is in Los Angeles? Well, I guess that's the way in which, if you teach people that poetry is just self-expression, they'll never break out of their prison. It's more than self-expression. If you teach them that poetry is more about language than self-expression, then they have to start to think. With what do you infect the community? If everyone is quiet and everyone is afraid, then things stay the way they are. So, you think there's hope in the children? We can hear in this set of questions the key words of Fred Dewey's life. Poetry and the quest to define it as a pertinent imaginative force. History, the cultural landscape and media saturation, the paradigm of community as a necessary fiction, the city and the human alchemy therein enacted, the search for equivalents that have metaphoric potential for transformation, the urgent primacy of language as the fundamental groundswell of poetry, and above all, hope for the future. I can't think of better things to build a legacy around, and I like to think we will be able to do so in his memory. Thank you.
Oh, Bill, thank you so much. I want to check, because it was kind of up in the air at this point. Lucas Reiner, did you want to come up and speak? Well, then Lucas Reiner, come on up and speak. God, we haven't seen each other in a few years.
I had to, when I saw your book, had to come up. Fred also gave me this Merton book. No, this is mine. He inscribed this one to me in 2005 with an. Anyway, yeah, but anyway, I had to just. I'm going to be very brief. I was searching for something Fred wrote to say. I was, I guess, another mentee of Fred's. We had a sort of mentor-mentee relationship that went back and forth, but he was a great mentor to me and set me on a course, I think, that changed my life in the year 2000. So this is from an email. I went through a mountain of emails from Fred, and he was a mountain of a person, so fitting to sift through all this, but he wrote to me, each of us, and this is, I thought, Jeremiah, you were talking about the 5 people and what it takes to change something, and this spoke to me. I'll try to channel Fred because there was an enthusiasm always in I could hear his voice when I read his words. Each of us makes a difference in the world, and that includes you. So please remember that for me, for your family, for everyone. One grain of truth, one action, one deed can change every constellation.
Lucas is an artist and a filmmaker, and he was also one of the most supportive people on the board when I served with Fred. And Lucas, I'm just so happy to see you here again. You know, I'm so pleased. And I still have my copy of Spirit of 76 in my video library. So, all right, let's see here. We are going to bring up next somebody I've never met before, so this is going to be a fun surprise. Dorit Cypus. Did I, please tell me how to pronounce that correctly.
It's Dorit Cypus.
Dorit Cypus, ladies and gentlemen. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. No worries. People often mispronounce my name. And I've gotten, I figured out years ago that if I tell people to think of Doritos and take off the OS, they'll get to my name. So that works. I have been a friend of Beyond Baroque since the early 80s, I remember, and coming to hear a lot of my colleagues read their work here, and worked with Dennis Cooper, who was early director. That was in the early 80s. And then I left LA for about 16 years and came back in 99. So I met Fred later. I knew him for about 20 years. And we would often meet. He somehow, I don't know why, knew of my work. I knew of his. I'd read his work. I'd come to the bookstore here quite often. He also was close friends with friends of mine, including Simone. And so it was, we would interact through various threads. But I think the thing that compelled my meetings with Fred often was I, in my own way, have always asked questions about what does it take to bring people together, and what does change take? Who do people have to be in order to see each other for who they are? And I think a lot of my work went more into the psychological dimension, the psychosocial, the psychological shadow underneath the politic or underneath the collective. So I often studied and researched and worked on interiority. And my conversations with Fred were often difficult because he had such a strong leaning towards ideology and language and thought. Not that I discounted, it's essential, but I always wanted to go underneath it into some other realm of what it means to be human and ask the question, how do we internalize the hurts that exist in culture? How do we become blindsided in ways that we unconsciously reproduce and reframe the very things that we are trying to unpack and make anew. So I brought something, and I wanted to ask Renee. Renee's a close friend, a shared friend. I brought this out of my studio today, and I'm not a poet. I wouldn't say I'm a writer, although I write often, and my visual work often has text in it. So if you would hold that up, it was just on my wall, and I thought this would be an occasion to read it. This is for you, Fred. Undefeated. What? Conscious without? From conscious without? For conscious without? What is surrender? What is surrender? Defeat? Where is recognition? Loss? Whom? What is conscious surrender without defeat? From where? Conscious recognition without loss? For whom? Conscious giving without expectation. Thank you.
And Dorit, that was a perfect example of how much Fred liked to play with text. He would have text painted on the walls in Beyond Baroque, and he liked having text events. And he didn't even like to text on his phone. He was quite the Luddite when it came to technology, but text he loved. Is this yours, by the way? Yes. Oh. We are getting down to the last few. We've got a bit of light left, and it is getting chilly, so we're trying to wrap this up. Also, this thing is saturated with hand sanitizer right now, so if I don't make any sense, that's why. I'm just inhaling, mainlining the hand sanitizer. But the good news is we have 3 feisty women coming up, one each in a row, one at a time. We have the nearly fatal women here today, ladies and gentlemen. And we are going to bring up that divine redhead, Miss Laurel Bogen.
Greetings. I guess you have all heard by now that where poets, Beyond Baroque, and writers in general were concerned, Fred Dewey was committed. Perhaps even more than committed, wherever, whenever he had a chance to push the boundaries, even just a bit, he would do so. I saw him at work. In fact, I worked with him on a successful project in the 1990s that I had heard about through Poets and Writers, the national literary nonprofit. At the time, I was literary curator at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, where I curated a monthly reading series. Poets and Writers' goal was to create a series of residencies that would connect visual and literary nonprofits. Fred worked tirelessly to benefit the as yet unknown applicants we hoped we would be able to offer these residencies. In the end, we did receive the grant. It was given by the Irvine Foundation and administered through Poets and Writers. The recipients spent half their time at LACMA and half at Beyond Baroque and received a stipend for their time and effort. Art and poetry, poetry and art. It was an honor to work on this project with Fred Dewey.
Yeah, so the pencil's stuck in my hair. I've got fumes coming out of my mask. I realized earlier I came up with 2 pairs of glasses on my head while I was wearing a 3rd pair. I'm really doing a damn fine job of this today. And you know, this is how Fred always saw me. You know, I'd come in bedraggled wearing a really old t-shirt, shorts with holes in them, and a pet wolf. And that would be like our meetings. Fortunately, the next person is nothing like me. She's excellent. Please welcome Linda J. Albertano. Honey, do not inhale this stuff.
Oh, I'm too far away to inhale it. Oh. So, living in Venice, I was kind of a neighbor of Fred's, and I would often see him run into him at Groundworks or at Zelda's. If I went to the Laemmle Theater, if there was a political film or an environmental film, Fred was ubiquitously in the audience. I used to take my mom when I was caring for her in her 80s to the Novel Cafe on Pier Avenue. And Fred was often there. He would tease her and she would giggle and just be so happy that somebody recognized her, paid attention to her, and made her smile. But the thing that I really admired about Fred, I really admired his political poetry. I admired his activism, and I really admired his community and organizing and involvement. It was not until recently that I learned that with Jeremiah, they were instrumental in starting the neighborhood councils citywide in LA, and that's been such a contribution. The thing about Fred is that he was not an armchair activist. He really did want to make the world a better place. And I always felt that Fred believed in the promise of America. He believed in American ideals, and that he did everything he could to bring them into reality. So I'm just going to read a fragment from his the 2006 Beyond Baroque journal that he edited, called Truth, Etc. And this is from Friendly Fire. The nation that prepares for peace will find peace. Prepare for peace. America, you are a glass house. Your instruments of battle are bleeding colors of destruction all over the globe. Be the beautiful. Be strong and brave. Lay down your weapons. Be the land of the free. Remember how you lifted your lamp beside the golden door? Unfurl the great fluttering promise you once made on that tall ship of state, so that we might sail your irresistible amber waves far, far into the future. And I want to thank Quentin and Amélie for bringing us all together to honor Fred Dewey.
I always just like to bask in her divinity as she walks away. So. And now you have to prepare yourselves, because we have the Queen of Night, LA's noir goddess, who has done many functions with Beyond Baroque. Please welcome Suzanne Lummus.
So I heard that word noir and I figured, oh, that must be me. I better start sliding out of my seat right now. Well, I'm the third of the nearly fatal women to come up, and I'm going to tell a story that speaks to Fred Dewey's relentless and deep, profound passion for Beyond Baroque, his feeling that he was the defender of Beyond Baroque, and I believe it was connected to a deep sense of honor. This is also a nearly fatal women's story that was nearly fatal, but it wasn't. And I'm going to give everybody a spoiler alert right now regarding this story. It has a happy end. It has almost a fuzzy, warm, happy end. And I'm telling you this right now because I don't want people to sit there in a state of anxiety, dread, fear, and suspense, thinking, where is this going? Will this turn out all right? Yes, it turns out All right. But this is what happened. It was the mid-90s. Laurel was reminding me. We had a conversation about the when and the where last night, mid-90s. And the Nearly Fatal Women have a really good, like the musicians say, gig. They say gig, right? So we had a gig here at Beyond Baroque, a fundraiser to send us to New York City, Manhattan, everybody. And somehow we had landed to be our sort of opening act. And maybe, Linda, you were the one who helped land us? John Fleck? We had John Fleck. Yeah. Did you get us John Fleck, Linda? Who did? Oh, good. See? That's clout. And so Fred was excited about having us and happy about that, but he was really happy about having John Fleck. That was like just the gold standard in performance art in LA. And we were something else, the copper standard or something. But anyway, and all was good, except that John Fleck got a paying, like the musicians say, gig, in New York City, and he needed to take this paying gig. So he got somebody to replace him, somebody really good, the Dark Bob. Named the Dark Bob because the other Bob, some people here are saying, wow. I hear some wows from the audience go, wow, we got the Dark Bob. Yes, we did. And he was the Dark Bob because the other Bob that he performed with in the early pioneering age of performance art, the performance art movement in LA. The other Bob had light hair, and he was called the Light Bob, and this was the Dark Bob. They were both good. We got the Dark Bob. However, Fred had not yet heard of the Dark Bob. He was going to, he would, but he had not yet. And has anybody, I mean, nobody has really mentioned, well, yes, some people have hinted at it. I've heard people hint at it up here, like Councilman Bonin or some distinguished people hinted at. Has anybody ever seen Fred get emotional? No? So a few? Okay, 3 people. 3 have seen him get emotional. And we 3 experienced that. I guess, Linda and Laurel, he showed us his vulnerable side because he trusted us. I think that was an honor to us that he trusted us by showing us his vulnerable. He got very emotional because he felt that if John Fleck dropped out of the program, it would reflect badly on Beyond Baroque. And in fact, Beyond Baroque would lose face and lose respect. And so he did not want him, he was not going to let him drop out. That was a big problem. And I only remember that I was certainly one of the crisis managers in this situation, I guess, somehow, because I remember myself in a payphone. Is there a payphone anywhere within, back then, mid-90s, remember there were no cell phones. I just have a memory of myself on the payphone with John Fleck, who we barely knew each other and met maybe twice. And I'm trying to calm him down and calm myself down and tell John Fleck I'm going to try to calm Fred Dewey down and calm the Dark Bob down, and somehow it's all going to work out. And I've decided that driving here, I thought if I don't believe in future lives, past lives, reincarnation, but if I'm ever reincarnated, which I don't think I will be, I just can picture myself being hypnotized by a reincarnation memory person, and I'm going back and I'm saying, okay, I was talking to this notorious and famous performance artists, and there are 2 women, and for some reason they're called Nearly Fatal Women, and there's some in the picture, and somebody, an older, a nice, distinguished man, is surrounded by books, and he's wringing his hands and he's almost crying, he's weeping, and his name is Fred. And the person would say, that a hypnotist would say, oh, that can't have happened. That wasn't your past life. That was a dream. Just reciting a dream. Anyway, what happened is Linda finally persuaded him to read some literature about the Dark Bob. And it seemed like days that this went on, but we decided maybe it was only hours. It seemed like days. Somehow Fred, and I remember this, walks out of the office going, the Dark Bob is really amazing. He was an important person in the progress and the movement of LA performance art. He was a key figure, and he was so happy to have the Dark Bob. And then it was all resolved, and then we did our show, and we packed the place, didn't we? We got enough money to go to New York, and the Dark Bob, I mean, I'm telling you, he is the most, I have never seen a man be so attractive to a cis woman like me, as they now say, attractive and virile wearing a skirt. Because Sarah McLay and I were standing there watching him going, damn. And so what this speaks to is Fred's passion, which may seem eccentric at moments, maybe a little over the top at moments, but it stood us in very good stead when it came to hanging on to that lease, right? Thank you, Amélie, Frank, for your own passion. Quentin, where are you? For your passion and your eccentricities and your work ethic for bringing us all together. Did I go over 4 minutes? I think I did.
I wish I could bottle and use Suzanne's energy. Thank you, Suzanne. We are down to our last handful of people, 3 speakers, each of whom has something very important to say and needs to be heard, and then 2 people who will be reading poems from people who wanted to be here today. And also Matthew Mars will not be here. He has taken ill, so he will not be joining us on the program. So next, I would like to bring up another person who served on the board with us, and I'm so happy to have him here. We haven't seen each other in a while. Please welcome Jack Skelley.
Thank you, Amélie. Oh my gosh, it is great to see you. Hi. Oh, thank you. Thank you, everybody. This is really amazing. This is crazy. It's so good. I did serve on the board with Amélie and Lucas and also Brooks Roddan, who can't be here today. He's in Wyoming. He asked me to say, I can't imagine a world without Fred in it, but here we are. And I can't imagine a world without Beyond Baroque in it. And it's true that although George Drury Smith founded Beyond Baroque, it's Fred who secured Beyond Baroque. And that's why we're still here right now. So, God damn it, great. God damn it. So, I don't know how, this is a holy place, for me. And I don't know how many of you got to see this installation that the Hammer and the Huntington did, Beyond Baroque, it's called. This artist Sabrina Tarasov created this installation, Walk Through Haunted House. It's called Beyond Baroque, and it elicited the spirits of many of the people who have now passed, like Fred, and many dear friends of mine, including Louis McAdams and Mike Kelly and Ed Smith, and especially Bob Flanagan. So I got the chance to work with Quentin, with the artist, and in the heat of producing these videos and installations and everything, at one time I had a dream that the artist, Sabrina, was telling me in my dream, Jack, you lived on a demon-sized planet. And I knew exactly what that meant. You lived on a demon-sized planet. So I wrote a poem about it, and it's dedicated to Fred. And the epigraph is from Michelle T. Clinton. And the epigraph reads, like, what the fuck else are we gonna do? We got so much heart. I lived on a demon-sized planet. It was designed for the smaller but more virulent demons. We found it easy to speed around on little demon scooters, and everyone knew each other's diminutive demon names. I had a job staging plays with demons and angels. I used to work here. I used to practically live here. In one play, an elongated demon crushed an angel-sized city with her spike heels. Angry angels ran screaming from tiny buildings. Best of all were the demon-sized lovers, slim enough to fit inside my demon-sized heart, and yet our emotions were quite large. Though our planet was small, our emotions never stopped expanding. For a few, unfortunately, the planet became too tiny. They were smudged away. Love was the biggest emotion. We created the plays to hold our growing feelings so we could stare at them and understand them. What the fuck else were we going to do? Our hearts were too small to hold all that love. Thank you.
Oh, Jack. Mwah. Thank you. We're losing lights, so let's do the best we can with this. Next up, a woman who, with her sister, has been closely affiliated with Beyond Baroque and had close friendships, both of them, with Fred Dewey. And I could not imagine doing this event without her. Please welcome Pegarty Long.
I can hardly walk. I'm sitting here for so thank you, Amélie and Quentin, and everyone who spoke. I just really inspired and learned so much more what Fred Dewey. Oh shoot! Can you hear me? Is this mic on? Oh, now the mic. Okay. So I took the personal side, and I'm just going to read what I wrote of my memories of Fred Dewey. Fred Dewey was a brilliant, generous, and a good man. He was an intellectual. He did many important things for others and for our dear Beyond Baroque. The first time I saw him, he was speaking at the lectern wearing all black in the black room. This very lectern. He spoke elegantly and enthusiastically to a packed audience. My first thought, this man is smart. And he's cute. When my sister Philomene's husband, beat poet John Thomas, died, she was inconsolable. She lived on ongoing nightmare, which when I thought it couldn't get any worse, got worse, then unbearably worse. Enter Fred Dewey. He got her back into Beyond Baroque, reading her poetry, teaching the poetry workshop again, and seeing all her poetry friends. The night before our birthday, Fred and Philomene went to the Santa Monica Mountains to watch the great August Perseid meteor showers, like fly above LA. Fred knew a special place that was very dark, so they experienced the sublime vision of those shooting stars. He was very good at finding special places. He was very good at finding special movies and special authors and getting things done. We had a grand little birthday party, just Fred, Philomene, Herb, and I, dining on fine Italian food and drinking exquisite wine. After the dinner, Philomene announced in a dramatic tone, when we were leaving the Perseid showers, I saw two shooting stars together, and those two stars, Pegarty, were you and I. That's my birthday present to you. Cheap present, I joked. I walked into my apartment a few days later. There was a message. It was Fred Dewey. Pegarty, pick up. This is serious. Philomene, the Ellison. I called Herb and we rushed up 2 blocks to my sister's building. I was too afraid to face what I knew was terrible news. Alone, when we got there, Fred Dewey was at the gate. 2 detectives in black stepped out right behind him and asked who I was. I said, her sister. They said, your sister is dead. No, she's not, I shot back in denial. We waited outside on the steps of the Ellison for the coroner for hours. Fred stayed with us and then stood in a little line as I brought Philomene down on a stretcher with a baby blue cover, and I kissed her goodbye. Fred was there for everything. He read the eulogy at the funeral mass. he began preparation to dedicate the library to Philomene. He told me he had just made me a member of the Beyond Baroque Advisory Committee. Counsel, what? What do I have to do? I asked. Oh, nothing, he said. I just want you there. He knelt before Philomene's coffin at the funeral and opened up the Beyond Baroque Hall for our Irish wake, where we drank ourselves silly while Wanda Coleman and I sang Irish songs at the top of our lungs. After Wanda's husband, Austin, had to carry her to the car, and that was no small feat. Later, I asked Fred how to get to that spot where they watched the Perseid towers. It was very special now because Philomene's words about the two stars, and they were her last words to me. Fred drew a map, and I tried, but I couldn't find it. After Philomene died, I used to meet with Fred when he came back from his frequent trips to Berlin. We went to Finn McCool's because of the Irish thing, and as we were leaving, he grabbed me and gave me a bear hug goodbye. I thought he was going to break my ribs. He screamed at me so hard. That was the last big hug I got from him. That was our last goodbye. When I received the shocking news that Fred died, I went through his emails in a desperate attempt to find a connection. Something miraculously popped up. He had found and sent a real map with directions to that special place of the Perseid showers. I was stunned. It felt as if Fred was speaking to me from the beyond. Thank you, Fred, for all you've done for us and Beyond Baroque. I miss your sweet smile and that twinkle in your eyes. Bless you wherever you are. Peace, peace, love, love. If such things happen, maybe you and I and all of us will meet again.
Thank you so much for making it out today. It has meant a lot to us for you to be here, Pegarty. Our final speaker of the evening has been involved in making sure that Fred's legacy, his books, his papers are not lost, and she was a good friend of his. Please welcome Amy Scholder.
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for this beautiful, really beautiful tribute, beautiful afternoon. Thank you, Quentin. Thank you, Amélie, all the folks at Beyond Baroque. Thank you, Renee, for bringing me back in touch with Fred these past few years. I've been thinking about Fred and his commitment to a literary meeting place, and that phrase always reminds me of Lawrence Ferlinghetti, whose City Lights, what Lawrence called a literary meeting place, was dear to Fred and to me in my history. So I'd like to read from Lawrence's populist manifesto in this book, Who Are We Now?, in honor of Fred. Poets, come out of your closets, open your windows, open your doors. You've been holed up too long in your closed worlds. Come down from your Russian hills and Telegraph Hills, your Beacon Hills, your Chapel Hills, your Mount Analogues and Montparnasse, down from your foothills and mountains, out of your teepees and domes. No time now for the artist to hide, above, beyond, behind the scenes, indifferent, paring his fingernails, refining himself out of existence. No time now for our little literary games. No time now for our paranoias and hypochondrias. No time now for fear and loathing. No time now only for light and love. We have seen the best minds of our generation destroyed by boredom at poetry readings. Poetry isn't a secret society. It isn't a temple either. Time now to open your mouths with a new open speech. Time now to communicate with all sentient beings. All you poets of the cities hung in museums, including myself. All you poets writing poetry about poetry. All you poetry workshop poets in the boondock heart of America. All you housebroken Ezra Pounds. All you far out, freaked out, cut up poets. All you pre-stressed concrete poets. All you masters of the sawmill haiku in the Siberias of America. All you eyeless unrealists. All you self-occulting super surrealists. All you bedroom visionaries and closet agitopropagators. All you Groucho Marxist poets and leisure class comrades who lie around all day and talk about the working class proletariat. All you Catholic anarchists of poetry, all you black mountaineers of poetry, all you Boston Brahmins and Bolinas bucolics, all you den mothers of poetry, all you Zen brothers of poetry, all you suicide lovers of poetry, all you hairy professors of poesy, all you poetry reviewers drinking the blood of the poet, all you poetry police, where are Whitman's wild children? Where are the great voices speaking out with a sense of sweetness and sublimity? Where the great new vision, the great world view, the high prophetic song of the immense earth and all that sings in it and our relation to it? Poets, descend to the street of the world once more and open your minds and eyes with the old visual delight. Clear your throat and speak up. Poetry is dead, long live poetry, with terrible eyes and buffalo strength. Don't wait for the revolution or it'll happen without you. Stop mumbling and speak out with a new wide open poetry, with a new communo-sensual public surface, with other subjective levels or other subversive levels, a tuning fork in the inner ear to strike below the surface of your own sweet self. Sing, still sing, yet utter the word en masse. Poetry, the common carrier for the transportation of the public to higher places than other wheels can carry it. Poetry still falls from the skies into our streets, still open. They haven't put up the barricades yet. The streets still alive with faces, lovely men and women still walking there, still lovely creatures everywhere. In the eyes of all, the secret of all still buried there. Whitman's wild children still sleeping there, awake and walk in the open air. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. That was what I think we all exactly needed to hear. And we belong to all of those groups. We are all of those children. We have two final pieces from poets who could not be here tonight, but definitely should be represented. Harry Northup, yet another member of the Cahuenga Press, lives at the Motion Picture and Television Fund home, and he is not allowed to leave campus during COVID. So I have invited a poet affiliated with Beyond Baroque since 1978 to read a brief poem that I found very appropriate for tonight. Please welcome Lynn Bronstein.
This is called The White Forehead. The mark of a good man is his honesty. The elevation of his heart is in his compassion. Many poets I know seek money and power. Many are materialists. Many are narrow and are abstract. Many have no sense of reality. Academics, administrators follow thee home to bind, gather, to give, to be human. A poet is a practical man. He has eyes to see for himself He lives among men, women, animals, angels. He does not live among one. He learns from men, women, and the parables of past erudite thinkers. He worships a real God who cares for all. He has a word he gives and keeps. He lives up to his word. He lives in a real world of people. He does not limit himself to one sex or one mathematical mind. He assumes breath. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. I wish we could have had Harry with us tonight. I know how many of us love him, and I know he wanted to be here, and at least he'll be able to see this event. We will be able to see on the YouTube channel, Beyond Baroque's YouTube channel. And now I'm going to read the last piece. This is from Imani Tolliver of the World Stage. Imani had great affection for Fred. And Fred, one of the most important pieces of advice he gave me was he said, always, always, always stand with the World Stage, have their back, make sure they are engaged and involved in everything that we do. They're so important. They are a major cultural treasure. And Imani had terrific affection for Fred. And in fact, it was Fred who introduced us. We became very good friends. So for Fred, she's asked me to read our final piece, Ode to the Library. Here in the Venice Branch Library, just west of Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, the place where I feared to tread when walked in one day and walked out an organizer. A curator of the dark sublime, a bridge between whites and browns, cruising the 90 freeway, our great divide to poetry slams, art exhibitions, bluesy readings, memorials, tributes to the risen ones who hold our backs straighter as we write to the smallest stage, us to the larger one, God to what seems to be the largest of all them, audiences, seeking connection with this page, which is to say, my heart. Oh, the confessions I've shared and relied upon to love me up when the tears of years have weighed me down so. Here, at the library, I remember my first apartment blocks away, driving a carnation pink scooter all the way to work, taking Venice Boulevard, cutting north, until I got to Wilshire Boulevard, just shy of Vermont Avenue. This was the upscale stretch of downtown LA, home to the Brown Derby, I. Magnons, and Bullock's Wilshire, where polite luncheons were served, models donned pencil skirts and well-constructed purses, with frozen hair and frozen smiles, ambled in front of young mothers and well-behaved daughters, eating politely while dreaming of a future in those clothes, an accessible couture, magnificently tailored and ladylike, appropriateness attainable for a price. Here, though, at the library, I'm remembering Saturday afternoons curling up with a dictionary and the complete plays of Shakespeare, memorizing Richard III's monologue in which he claimed the audible ugly, the unfinished form that was woefully him, and me, barely 21, would weep these words as if I wrote them, as I spoke the verses aloud. They shaped the otherness I felt, the misshapen experience I lived as a tall, big-boned girl growing up in the shadows of Hollywood. Poolside with the nearly rich, adjacent to the Beverly Hills experience, I never wanted, not really, except the access to self-acceptance, the entitled stalwart stride through each open door, opened widely for me. I wish I had chosen library doors instead of an all-night movie house in the deepest downtown LA, Wish I knew how to turn my imagination around to a story in the stacks, a safe place, instead of spending my last few dollars on roller skate rentals at the beach. My path followed by someone meaning no good, the breaking that would unfold into poems, and hard work saving. As I sit in the Venice Branch Library, there is the soft clicking of low heels, the whispered slide of shelves being restocked. There is a woman nearby, a mother, most likely, her eyes thumbing young adult fiction. There is a tattooed middle-aged surfer watching a film on a portable DVD player. Between periodicals and books in Spanish, an older man, all silver, considered the stacks. I am sitting in a sunny place where light is reshaped by vertical blinds, the crowns of palm trees and pendant lanterns above me. Perhaps there isn't a resolution to this life, but I will continue to do what I do best, speak what I claim to know, and hope to be remembered by a shore that has recorded every transition I've lived, the shore of books, I mean to say, the place of the open story that finds me as I become again, and blessedly again. Imani Tolliver. That is it for our program tonight. First of all, I wish to thank all of you who have stayed into the darkness, into the cooler air, who were able to stay. Some people left early because they have been dealing with not feeling well. And so we tried to program it around people's ability to hang in there. And Quentin was magnificent in helping me to program this. So I thank all of you. I thank Quentin. I thank everybody on staff who helped pull this together. And despite it getting dark, it is still festive and warm. And it is so full of Fred's joy in doing things here. He liked a good party. I'd say we threw him a damned fine one. Good night.
Thank you, Amélie. Thanks, everyone, for coming. On that last note that Amélie mentioned, we have some tacos for you. They'll be served right over here. There's some drinks, dessert. Please stick around. Enjoy everyone's company. We haven't been able to gather for a long time, so thank you all for coming. We do have Fred's books in the bookstore as well. Feel free to hang out for a while. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Bring this in the lobby like I said we would.
Yeah,